Okay, in today's video, I want to highlight something that I'm noticing as I read this, something that I think is kind of confusing at first, but it just dawned on me that maybe there's a different way to read these passages. We're looking at verses 21 through the end of 30, which is our reading for this week. Jesus continues to talk to the Pharisees. He's in conflict with them. That tension is only going to increase over the next couple of chapters, leading to the breaking point where they finally have the grounds and the motivation to arrest Jesus, which they want to do at this point. They just haven't had the good enough excuse to be able to actually pull the trigger and do it. So here Jesus is in the conflict with them, and he says to them, I'm going away. You're going to look for me, and you will die in your sin. Where I go, you cannot come. And I just kept thinking, okay, where are you going, Jesus? And that's the same question the Pharisees are asking. And on the one hand, we can read this as Jesus is going to die and he's going to go back to heaven to be with God and they're not going to be able to come. And I think that's probably a valid way to read it, but I also think there's a little bit more of a nuanced way that helps pull this into focus. Later in this section, Jesus is going to talk about in verse 28, when you have lifted up the Son of Man. And that idea of Jesus being lifted up is actually a way of talking about Jesus' death on the cross. The moment when Jesus is lifted up is the moment where he is literally lifted up on the cross. So when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees about where he's going, I actually think he's not necessarily talking just about his death, but the moment of his death, when he is on the cross. And why is this a place where the Pharisees aren't able to go? We know of other followers of Jesus later who will be crucified. I think Jesus is pointing out the hypocrisy in them. Jesus comes to be lifted up to die for the sins of the world. And the only reason that he is able to do that is because Jesus is the truly human one. Jesus is the one who came and was sinless among us. He was the only one who was able to reverse the pattern that we see in the fall of Genesis 3. And here's how I know that. In this chapter, in verse 28, Jesus says to them, I do nothing on my own. Remember, the whole idea behind Genesis 3 is that humans took the knowledge of good and not good for themselves. They decided, all of us, make the decision all the time to do what's right in our own eyes. But over and over again in the gospel stories, we see Jesus doing the exact opposite. He doesn't do what's right in his own eyes. He always does what's right by God. He knows what God's will is. That's what he does, even when it means he's going to go to the cross. We know that Jesus doesn't want to do that. That's what the whole Garden of Gethsemane episode is all about. But yet Jesus does what's right in the Father's eyes instead of doing what's right in his own eyes. And that's the reason he can go to the cross for us, but the Pharisees can't. And that's such a tragedy because the Pharisees, the leaders of Israel, the ones who knew their scriptures inside and out, they're the ones who've missed this. Not only should they have been the ones who were leading Israel in faithfulness to God, yet they were corrupt and doing the exact opposite. They're also the ones who should have been able to recognize Jesus when he came. They should have been the ones to know that the Messiah was going to have to die, as the prophets pointed to over and over again, and yet they miss it. And Jesus just tells them, you can't follow me because of that. Because Jesus does nothing on his own. This is the moment when Jesus is lifted up on the cross, that the fact that he is the Messiah comes into really clear view, but only for those who have the eyes to see it. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to get them to see, is they're not believing in him. So they're not going to see the truth of who he is and what that means for his death on the cross. And the tragedy is that they're the ones who are going to be lifting him up and actually helping him to fulfill his destiny in the first place. If only they had eyes to see, they would know who it is that was on the cross and that he was dying also for them. This is the act that when Jesus is lifted up, this is when he's being made known for the victory. That's when he is being crowned king. All of these prophecies come back to life, basically, in this moment. So I think this is what Jesus is talking about when he tells them that they can't follow him, that he's going to be lifted up. And I think that the Pharisees are blinded to that. And it begs the question, what are we blinded to? What are the aspects of Jesus that we just can't see because we are clouded, our minds are clouded by our own interpretations of what he should be or what he should be doing in the world? I would just hope that you would wrestle with that a little bit today, and maybe your eyes can be opened a little bit more to the truth of who Jesus is and what he came to do for you specifically.